Okay, good morning to you all. Today is Wednesday and it is September 23rd, and we are starting a new chapter today, chapter 3. This will be the first lecture for chapter 3. So keep that in mind. Remember that the next exam, exam 2, covers chapters 2, 3, and 4. And this is chapter 3. And we are beginning cognitive development, building a foundation. I apologize for that. I thought I had everything turned off. I hope that it doesn't happen again. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I'm always getting calls or somebody's at my door, and I will do my very best to catch that early if it happens. And again, I apologize for that. So again, chapter 3 is cognitive development, building a foundation for language. All right. We have finished nature versus nurture. We've talked about Mother Ease. Now I want to remind you also, I have listed 2 YouTube videos that I want you to watch focusing on Mother Ease, Parent Ease, Father Ease, whatever you want to call it. And there is not a link on Canvas. What you have is the names of those 2 videos. So you will need to go to YouTube video examples of Mother Ease. YouTube video examples of Mother Ease is what you want. And when I Google that, it comes up, and I can see on the right side of my screen different videos of Mother Ease. And I've given you the titles, so you should be able to find those without any difficulty. And Mother Ease is talking to that infant, holding that infant. Your volume may be softer. You're holding that infant. Remember, 7.5 to 8 inches from your face. Infants and young babies are far more interested in your face. They like to see the movements of your mouth, your eyes, your head. They're looking at the different angles of your face. They're listening to the rising pitch. They're listening to your simple language. They are very soothed by what they're hearing. Also, those infants are smelling you and what you smell like. It's bonding. It's an excellent, excellent, excellent bonding time. And the parent or the caregiver really needs to make sure they're bonding with their baby. That is a psychological, emotional must for that parent, that caregiver, and that infant. So, and I don't believe there's any solid research how that facilitates language development, but I will tell you that it really does. You, as the parent caregiver, may be stroking the baby's face, and you're talking very sweetly. Oh, look at my baby. Oh my gosh, that was a big yawn. Oh, I think you're so sleepy. Sleepy. Oh, you're so sleepy. That's Mother Ease. And again, that is so instrumental for bonding. All right, let's begin with chapter 3 and cognitive development. We, in the research and those of us who have had lots of experience in working with children know that cognition and language are very closely related. Now, there's been a lot of debate on how those two issues, those two domains, connect and affect one another. We can look at cognition separate from language in terms of assessment. I want to know what the individual's language skills are like. I want to know what their cognitive skills are like, because that tells me a little bit about their need for therapy or intervention. It sometimes is the driving force behind behavioral objectives that I might write in order to begin working with that child or that person. We cannot separate cognition and language much at all. We look at them maybe a little bit separately, but believe me, they are intertwined. Cognition and language run parallel. They're almost, in my mind, they're almost synonymous. They're so closely related. In chapter 3, we have some information about cognition, language, intelligence based on Gardner's 8 multiple intelligences. You will find that on page 64, table 3.1 in your textbook. But Gardner, and I'm going to give you just a little information about Gardner. Howard Gardner was born in 1943. So he's about 77 years old if he's still alive. And he was probably a bright child. He studied piano. He was inspired by Piaget, and we'll talk a little bit more about Piaget and the sensory motor development. And he was a Harvard psychologist. So this guy had some cognitive ability. And his theory suggests that intelligence is just not a number. It's just not an IQ score. So he developed a school, Gardner's school, and focusing on these 8 areas of intelligence. The school was primarily for those children who were college bound. So I guess you would say it was a college prep school in grades 7 through 12. And we see that a lot in private schools, which is what Gardner's school was. It was a private school. We know that in early elementary, you could go to public school or a private school. Once you get into middle school, high school, then you have to switch schools. So his focus was on the environment and the arts. And he wanted to facilitate the skills and the development of these really bright, creative, maybe non-traditional learners. ADHD, or children with other special needs, would have to submit a psychoeducational assessment. They maybe even had to have letters of recommendation from other people. They maybe had to be tested prior to. Now, some people might say, well, that's just a way to weed kids out. Well, yeah, could be. We see other schools do that. If it's a private school, they want testing, they want test scores, they want letters of recommendation, they want to meet the child for an interview, and Gardner did the same thing, interviewing the child, the parents, and it's a way to control the population that you have in your school. But also, I think it's a way to say to a parent, we can't meet your child's needs. If a child is in a private school and they have a learning disability, they need the help of a resource teacher, or maybe the speech pathologist who can focus on language processing disorders, dyslexia. Are they going to let the speech pathologist take care of that, or the reading teacher? Some of the private schools just simply cannot afford that because they don't have the advantage of state funding. So therefore, their programs are sometimes stripped down a little bit, or they're just focusing on the academics. So they do select their students carefully. In the school that I found that was in Alexandria, Virginia, he had a total of 24 students in this school. There were 10 teachers, and the ratio was 6-1. So the teacher only had 6 students. Well, we have never experienced that. Surely I didn't. And my classes were probably larger than some of your classes. But that ratio of 6-1 is unbelievable. Many of the faculty members had advanced degrees, meaning PhDs. The average SAT score is 1220. The yearly tuition to go there was over $20,000. But they did offer financial aid. The school started at 10 a.m. in the morning, and there was limited homework. That was Gardner School. So his focus was to take these bright kids and use their talents to facilitate learning as a strategy for learning. And let's talk about those 8 intelligences. The first one is visual spatial intelligence, and their strengths would be visual, spatial judgment. Now, some of these kiddos, as I think about visual spatial, probably could be architects. Think about jobs, a career that would focus on visual spatial. Architects, an artist, an engineer. He said these children enjoyed reading and writing. They were good at puzzles. Makes sense, doesn't it? Visual, spatial. And we know that a lot of our children who have a diagnosis of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, are very good visually. They're not as strong with auditory information, communication, understanding communication, and generating that. These kids would also be good at drawing and painting. So that's a visual spatial intelligence. 2 was a linguistic verbal intelligence. So think about kids who would be strong in words, language, writing. So they could be lawyers, teachers, maybe a journalist. The 3rd one was logical mathematical intelligence. These kiddos would be good at analyzing problems and mathematical operations. A mathematician, scientist, computer program, an accountant for sure. Number 4, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, meaning physical movement, motor control, good at dancing, sports, building, a sculptor, an actor. Now remember, we're talking about more than just that IQ number. These children show a particular talent or strength in these areas. Musical intelligence, the career might be a musician, composer, singer. Interpersonal intelligence could be a psychologist, philosopher, counselor, salesperson, or a politician. And boy, do we have the influence of politics right now. So maybe our popular, maybe not well liked, but the popular are the ones we hear about. Interpersonal intelligence could be some of our politicians that we see on the news. And intrapersonal, meaning within, philosophers, writers, theorists, scientists. Number 8, The naturalistic intelligence, I think that one was added a little bit later, could include the biologist, the gardener, the farmer. Now, one example that I can think of right now, some of our athletes um, who go to college or they're recruited heavily because that talent for the kinesthetic, remember the bodily movement, this bodily kinesthetic intelligence, physical movement, motor control, these athletes are phenomenal. You give them a ball of any kind and they could juggle, they can make a basket from really far back, uh, the bat hitting a ball, and that could be some visual spatial too. But we've heard that he never would have gotten into college. She never would have made it just on academic scores or grades. And so these athletes have tutors, they have individuals making sure they go to class. Sometimes you'll hear somebody who doesn't like a particular athlete say, oh, he's just a dumb basketball player. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know that I would go as far as to say that because they have to learn plays, certain plays on the field or on the court. Um, but intelligence, in terms of academics, they are not strong. But could they have had a learning disability? Could they be dyslexic? We know many famous people who have dyslexia, who had a learning disability. And it had nothing to do with an IQ, but the approach to learning was very different. So Gardner says, I'm going to take these really bright kiddos and we're going to tap into their talents. There was at one time a Gardner School in Indianapolis, by the way, and I had a student in class in 270 who attended that school. I was asking her questions about it, and she reported they did not have grades. They worked in groups, so they were bringing in the talents or the strengths of some students to work on projects, and each student would bring their particular talent to that project. And I can't honestly remember how she said they were evaluated, but they didn't get grades. And so I said, well, how tough was that for you coming to school? And she said it was a big adjustment. But there was a school in Indianapolis at one time. But I don't know that it's still there. I tried to Google it, research it, and I couldn't find it. Okay, so that's Gardner. It's a very interesting theory. And if you know anything about Montessori, it is taking the child's interest, and the child is sort of the driving force behind some things that they are interested in, they want to learn about, and utilizing their particular talent in a way. Okay, we're going to talk about Piaget now. And Piaget, of course, was a well-known psychologist in the United States. His field of study was genetics. Sounds like the nativists a little bit, and how knowledge is acquired. He believed that cognitive development was both the result of genetics and environment. Sounds like the social interventionist that we've talked about in chapter 2, where the common thread now is that the socialists believe that it is a combination of genetics and environment. And that's personally what I believe too in working with children. It is always amazing to me the children that we hear about on the news who grow up in very poor environments and how they rise above that and become Supreme Court justices or very famous, highly respected individuals. But Piaget said it's both. It's genetics and the environment. When we learn new information, or when we take information in, and brain plasticity is extremely important. That's how our brain adapts to new information, the flexibility of our brain. But new information coming in, has to go someplace. And the category or the file that we put it in is called the schema. We either put it in a file, now think of that as being sort of a way to describe what you do with it, but we know we don't put it in a file in the brain, but it has to go someplace in the brain. And sometimes it goes with information that it seems to fit with. It goes into that schemata. Information. We're processing using existing schemata, something that's already there, to include new information. That information is related, and that's called assimilation. Assimilation. Now, on my PowerPoint, that's on page 39, and it is in the slide at the top. Assimilation. The process of using existing schemata to include new information. So I learned about, and I'm a good example of that over the last few months, learning about the computer and Zoom meetings and Hushmail and WebEx, and it makes my brain hurt. And it is new information to me. So I put it someplace in my brain that I have no place else to put it. However, when I learn something new that sounds familiar to me, I begin to accommodate it. So when we develop new schemata to allow for the organization of information, we can call it accommodation. So with assimilation, you're taking the information. I'm taking that, I think I've confused you. I'm taking that information about the computer when I learn something new. For example, I learned about WebEx first. Then when I learned about Zoom, I was able to take that Zoom information and put it over with the WebEx information. And maybe I was able to compare the differences in terms of accessing it, what it can do for me. So that was assimilation, putting it someplace that I already had information. But when I got into Hushmail, now that was a different ballgame. And by the way, Hushmail is encrypted. It's a way to make sure that your Zoom meetings and telepractice with families is more secure. I had to put that in a new place. I didn't have any place to put it. So that's accommodation. Assimilation, taking the information, putting it with familiar information. Accommodation is taking brand new information. You have nothing like it, so you put it someplace new. I hope I made that clear. The assimilation, where you're putting similar information together, helps children process, identify, organize, and store. That child really has to think about that information. Okay, well, that sounds familiar. I've heard that before. I think I've heard that name. I think I know the name of that street. I think that street is close to this street. When we're taking in directions, for example, the accommodation, I can't relate it to anything. Makes no sense. But when we're using a balance between assimilation and accommodation, it's called equilibrium. So, okay, this sounds like it belongs over here, but only part of it does. So I'm finding the middle of the road. New information assimilation, or I did it to you again. Putting information together that we are familiar with, assimilation, new information is accommodation, and equilibrium is the balance of the two. So you have to put it someplace. You have to do something with that information. You have to remember it. Well, there's cognitive plasticity right away, using information and making the decision. Do I assimilate it? Do I put it with something else? Making the decision. Well, I don't know anything about that. So now what do I do? So you have to make some pretty sophisticated decisions, I would say. When we encounter stages and substages of cognitive development, one stage builds on another. Piaget says this child has to go through all these stages. You can't skip a stage. He is saying you have to build. One stage builds upon another. Intellectual growth is a cumulative, integrative, expanding process. Let me read that again. Intellectual growth is a cumulative, integrative, and expanding process of assimilation of information, accommodation, a place new, and equilibrium, using bits and pieces of that information that you do know or that is new. Now, Piaget has 4 stages of intellectual development, and I think I'm going to just review them very quickly and ask you to go to the PowerPoint and look at those in preparation for the next lecture. The 4 stages that Piaget has: sensory motor intelligence, pre-operational thought, concrete operations, and formal operations. Sensory motor, pre-operational thought, concrete operations, and formal operations. And with Piaget, that sensory motor, I want you to think about what that word means. If you divide that word up, sensory with the motor, what you're getting is the senses. You have sight, smell, taste, you hear, you touch, and motor, meaning motor development, movement. So you're using those senses that you have, and it's also muscle too, to help in motor, to help your intelligence, your cognitive development, and it helps you learn about the environment around you. Sensory motor is birth to 2, and that's where cognitive development occurs rapidly. Pre-operational thought is 2 years to 7 years, and pre-operational thought is the most rapid stage of language development. And if you remember, some time ago I was talking about how you might recognize what might be on a test, or how you decide what's important to know. Well, in the sensory motor intelligence from birth to 2, on the PowerPoint I have starred and underlined and highlighted, cognitive development occurs rapidly in sensory motor. That's an important point. That probably will be on a test. Pre-operational thought, 2 years to 7 years, most rapid stage of language development. Okay, there's another key that's important. In concrete operations, we're looking at 7 years to 11 years, and we know or we see that the child is beginning to think logically. There's some logic. You can rationalize. You can problem solve a little bit because of the logical thinking. You can't reason with a 2-year-old. They don't have the skills. Developmentally, that's not where they are. But with a child who's between 7 and 11 in concrete operations, certainly with that logical thinking, you can reason with them. You will never ever win trying to reason with a 2-year-old. Formal operations, 11 years to 15 years. The key here is cognitive ability is fully developed. Cognitive ability is fully developed. So what I'd like for you to do is to look at the PowerPoint and review Piaget's stages, those 4 stages of intellectual development. And you will then have a better understanding as we continue with that lecture. Again, I apologize for some of that confusion with assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation being you add it with information of using this new schemata, and then accommodation, the information doesn't fit, and equilibrium is both. That phone call kind of threw me off here, folks, and somebody's been trying to get me on my phone too, so I'm a little rattled here. And I just got in the office and I wanted to make sure I got this part of the lecture of chapter 3 for you. So I do believe that all of the information is clearly outlined in the PowerPoint, but I will go through that again when we begin the chapter 3A, which it will be the second part of this lecture. Okay, so I'm going to sign off for now, and I will be starting this information for my students who are in face-to-face class when I see them at 10 o'clock. Goodbye. Have a good day.